You're listening to episode 308 of Rogue State of Mind, formerly known as MitoLife Radio. I'm Matt Blackburn, your host, and today I'm interviewing Elizabeth Wells, all about liver health and liver flushes. Elizabeth is a huge proponent of liver flushes because she healed herself of many different conditions. She had chronic fatigue, Candida, multiple chemical sensitivity, electrosensitivity, anxiety, and all of that disappeared when she started to use liver flushes. And actually, it wasn't immediate. So in this episode, she talks about how it actually took about a year for the benefits of the liver flushing to fully kick in and for her symptoms to be 100% gone. Whether you're open to doing liver flushes or not, I think we could all agree that the liver is a super important organ. We all know about fatty liver and non-alcoholic and alcoholic fatty liver and liver fibrosis. And because of the myriad of assaults that we have coming at us daily and even out the gate when we were born, because our mom was deficient and our mom had heavy metal toxicity, we didn't start as a blank slate. We actually had our start in this world handicapped. And that is why I'm a huge proponent of pills, of high quality nutritional supplements, of health protocols. And one reason why I was excited to have Elizabeth on is I noticed this trend in the natural health community to be very anti-supplement and very anti-health protocols because they're, quote, too complicated. But the things aren't complicated in themselves. It's the people that are the problem. They're making it more complicated. They're listening to too many people and getting the information overload. More information is better. You just have to be careful which shows you listen to and which channels you tune into for that information. And I think Elizabeth is an awesome source when it comes to liver health. So she goes through what the liver does, 500 functions, how it regulates blood volume and temperature, helps to synthesize our cholesterol, how it stores different nutrients and converts our thyroid hormone. She explains what liver flushing is, how she heard about it, her personal experience with it, how they differ from coffee enemas, the beginner method of doing a liver flush. I ask her thoughts on turpentine, topical magnesium, especially in sulfate form, why potassium is so important to replenish after a liver flush. She shares symptoms of stagnant bile flow, why we use apple juice and tart cherry juice for liver flushing, why she loves fiber and how many grams of fiber she consumes every day, her thoughts on the carnivore diet, her thoughts on TUDCA, beans, oregano oil, probiotics. I ask her about the ropeworm, and then I ask her some listener questions, including her thoughts on HTMA, any tips for SIBO, how to minimize detox reactions when liver flushing, and a lot more. So enjoy the show. Here is Elizabeth Wells. Okay, Elizabeth Wells, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Matt. Great to be here.
Yeah, you were highly recommended by a few of my friends on detox and liver flushing. I've actually never done a liver flush, which might have been good to delve into it before we recorded, but maybe you'll inspire me to learn more about it. And I did hear of Andreas Moritz and his book back when I was raw vegan. You know, I did that back in 2010, and I remember that was going around that time. But I mostly have experience. I did tons of coffee enemas and ozone insufflations, and more recently, the last couple of years, learned about TUDCA from Adam and experimented with TUDCA and ox bile and stuff like that. But it's funny with people with all these health issues. Like I think your history, I was reading a little bit with Candida and chemical sensitivity and chronic fatigue, anxiety. electrosensitivity. Uh, a lot of that could just stem from gut, liver, gallbladder stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
I think when you start to show signs of something like multiple chemical sensitivity, I didn't know it at the time, but that really does reflect an overloaded liver, I would say, because obviously one of its main functions, and the gut as well, is to, be able to detoxify those chemicals and those substances. And electrosensitivity again is like, an extreme end of an overload, because then, metals start accumulating, then they function as like a giant antenna. So yeah, for me, I think everything was screaming liver, but at that time in the health space, there wasn't really the emphasis on liver cleansing or liver. It was just like, well, that's your filter. Everything was about gut healing. But as I've come to find out, there is no gut healing without the liver, and vice versa.
Around what year was all this happening?
Well, it's difficult to pinpoint a year because it was kind of like a long time in the wilderness for me. But I would say it all started when I was about 15 years old, and then sort of accelerated from there. So I got sick quite young. And then, yeah, around the time I started getting MCS, multiple chemical sensitivity, I guess, was around my late 20s. And that was interestingly off the back of a very kind of intense period of work stress as well, over exercising, pushing probably my cortisol levels into the roof. And everything kind of accumulated at once. The multiple chemical sensitivity and the electrical sensitivity kind of dovetailed. And so that was, I would say, at its worst around the age of 30, into my early 30s. Yeah, and made life very difficult. I couldn't work, I couldn't function, I couldn't go into shops, I couldn't go into a hairdresser's because of the smell. I would have to wear a lot of screening. Do you remember? I know kind of you're into this, kind of facet of the health space. So I don't know if you've kind of tried a lot of these things yourself, but I used to have to wear one of these head nets. Did you ever get into the
Uh,
head net?
no.
So it's like a shielding thing. And
Okay.
I think the real low point for me in my career when I was still trying to work was when I had to go to, I was doing A-level marking, which is basically functioning as an external examiner for, A-levels, which, kind of higher sort of qualifications, I guess, in sort of secondary, or yeah, like around the age of 17, 18. And I was an examiner in English literature, and I had to go to like an examiner center, and everything was Wi-Fi. And I really needed the money, but I knew that I wouldn't be able to work with kind of Ethernet, with a computer with Ethernet cable. I would have to use Wi-Fi for days. And I was just like, I can't do this unless I wear this head net. So I remember having to sit there in a room full of other examiners who were also all working at the computer. And I had this head net on, and I couldn't even really explain to them why I had it on. And I just remember going in every day and sitting there with this head net on my head and just thinking, this is just so awful. I just feel like such a freak. So I spent a lot of my 20s and 30s really having no clue why I was so sick. But yeah, that was a low point.
That's hilarious. So you're talking about it's like the silver embedded, like a floating
Yeah.
ground thing, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
That-
probably know more about what it was made of than me. But yeah, one of those mesh things.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I tried all the devices, and yeah, it was really difficult, and I couldn't use a mobile phone, and the whole kind of right side of my face would kind of go bright red, and I'd get ringing, and I had to be put in a separate room at work and stuff. It was, yeah, I felt freakish.
Wow. Yeah, the tinnitus thing that's a huge link to EMFs. And I've been delving back into EMFs. I've been fascinated by it since I got into health, but the whole EHS thing, or electrohypersensitivity, it's interesting that there's so many things that we could do beyond just buying, quantum scalar devices like I've been talking about, like
Yeah.
nutritional stuff, supporting the liver, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many things that people could do to try to reduce that before buying a really expensive machine, right?
And I think the interesting thing is actually is that when I realized how important it was to cleanse the liver and how kind of key that was to understanding, a kind of really severe chronic sensitivities like EHS. I remember I had set up like a group, a Facebook group for people dealing with EHS. And I remember kind of excitedly taking them through the process of liver flushing and telling them about my incredible progress. And literally no one wanted to know. It was like they were so embedded within their shielding narrative and, shielding kind of paradigm, if you like, that they weren't at all open to this idea that you could actually, potentially get over this chronic condition by actually cleansing and changing the terrain. And that was a real eye-opener to me because I realized, oh, wow, there's some very stuck thinking around certain chronic conditions and people are not really, they don't want to challenge their own preconceptions about things. And that was a bit of an eye-opener as well.
That's a great point. Yeah, it's that mental hurdle might be the biggest thing for a lot of people that are chronically ill, right? To
Yeah.
get over their block there.
Yeah.
Um, let's get into like what is the liver? What are its functions? Like why should we care about it?
Mm. So the liver works really, really hard for, in terms of the whole body. It is like the chief kind of body's the filter of the body. And it plays up to, I think, 500 different functions in the body. And so, it has this amazing ability to detoxify everything that, passes through the digestive system. It makes this amazing thing called bile, which is a kind of potent detoxifier, and it helps us digest our fats and assimilate fat-soluble vitamins, for example. It filters out, all the things we don't want, like toxins, drugs, alcohol, harmful substances from the blood, for example. It changes substances into other substances through phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. So it will change things into different metabolites, and then it will excrete those or pass those on to the kidneys so that the kidneys can then filter them into those toxins into the urine, for example. A substance, for instance, like ammonia, which is a byproduct of protein digestion, it will change that into a less harmful metabolite, urea, and then pass that to the kidneys to excrete. It helps us metabolize carbohydrates. It stores blood sugar as glycogen and then releases blood sugar when it's needed. And that kind of gets us over, periods of time when we're not eating or when we're fasting, for example. And often you see people who do have liver congestion, for example, will release a lot of cortisol when their liver is congested because their liver is not able to easily go through periods of fasting and to liberate that glycogen into glucose again. And so it stresses the body out and it pushes up cortisol, for example. It provides clotting factors. It helps to regulate blood volume. It even helps to regulate temperature, which is a really fascinating thing. So this was something that I learned actually quite recently, which is that it helps to deliver warmed blood to the peripheral tissues, for example. And that was one of the things I always dealt with, was I was always very, very cold. And so, liver cleansing has been an amazing way for me to actually help to have a warmer body. It helps to synthesize cholesterol, triglycerides. It helps to regulate the way that fat is stored and then released for energy. It stores lots of vitamins, for example, A, D, K, B12, some minerals as well, iron, copper, zinc. And really importantly, it also helps to control and metabolize the levels of hormones in the body as well, and excrete or balance hormones, excrete what is, in excess, and it helps to convert thyroid hormone, which is really important, into its active form, T3. So yeah, I mean, those are just some of the functions.
Yeah, all really critical stuff. I was actually just having a conversation with my friend here on the mountain over a cigar last night on alcoholics and just the whole topic of chronic daily alcohol use for, say, decades, and what that does to the body, the mind, and I personally think it has benefits in small amounts for lipofuscin reduction and stuff. It's not completely evil, but most people abuse it, and that acetaldehyde, the liver definitely has to detoxify that, right? And with it not functioning and being sluggish and suboptimal, I'm sure that's what 90+% of the people drinking alcohol, and so they're just contributing to what cirrhosis, right, is big. There's fatty liver, right, and
Yeah,
alcoholic liver and non-alcoholic fatty liver. And there's a lot
yeah.
there, but
Yeah, it's a huge one. But interestingly, one of the things that I've kind of been interested in is also the production of acetaldehyde by people who have extensive Candida or fungal overgrowth. So that's a massive one. And actually, the more kind of clients I treat who've got liver congestion, and when you go through the liver cleansing process with them, I would say almost all of them have a degree of fungal overgrowth. It's just there because, of course, the body's become down-regulated. Then you get these opportunistic pathogens, or things that aren't even pathogens but become pathogenic if given the right opportunity. And so, yeah, I mean, that is massive. Mycotoxin issue is so huge, and I'm really seeing it in a big way. And so, yeah, of course, alcohol, but also just alcohol produced from fungal overgrowth is a really major issue.
wow. Yeah, the mold thing comes and goes. I see waves of people asking me when, I guess, posts get circulating or something, but it's a real issue, and everyone has their different approach to mold illness. One that I found in the last year was like high dose powdered zeolite, because that'll help bind to mycotoxins. And so I don't think there's, I mean, from having this podcast and 15 years in, I don't think there's one magic bullet for everybody, but it's going to be probably one big thing that helps an individual, right? And it could be liver flushing, or it could be supporting the liver. But maybe it's that plus zeolite plus some other thing or whatever, right? But yeah, the whole mold recovery thing is a huge topic.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think, everything's got to be about habit stacking and protocol stacking. And there's never going to be, like, I would say liver flushing has got me kind of 80% of the way where I've got to today. But of course, there's lots of other things that I've used, and you need tools. Whatever protocol you're doing, you need tools. And with detox, it can feel very intense sometimes. So having, extra tools in your armory can make all the difference. And actually, I love high dose powdered zeolite too, and use it in my practice, and really, really love it. Yeah, that's been a bit of a game changer.
Oh, that's amazing. So, what started to move the needle for you? Like, where did you um, start with all of this? Like, did you try a liver flush and just felt immediately better, or what happened?
So I discovered it when I was actually studying for my naturopathic kind of qualification. And I remember discussing, or our lecturer discussed it in class, and she said, "Oh, you don't want to try one of these because actually all it is balled up olive oil and lemon juice." And I remember thinking, "Oh, dear, that sounds terrible. I better not do that." But at the time, I was a big fan of a website called Cure Zone, which was like it's such a kind of it's such a legendary website, and the people who kind of used to use Cure Zone, who are kind of a bit older like me, it was such a kind of hive of amazing, what we consider to be now biohacking, and lots of kind of quite legendary practitioners had their own channels on there. So Dr. Sutter was on there, Andreas Moritz was on there. And I was so desperately poorly, and we did all these very kind of new age, newfangled methods in my naturopath kind of diploma. But to be honest, none of them really made much of a difference. And they were all very kind of gentle, slightly witchy things to do, like, castor oil packs and things that I still, appreciate. But I wasn't really getting any better. And I kept coming back to Cure Zone. And there were lots of people on Cure Zone doing liver flushes. And so I did 3 liver flushes. This was back in about 2009 and got no stones out. Nothing happened. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I just don't have stones then. I must be one of the lucky ones. Little did I know that I was actually so congested that I couldn't get anything to come out. That was how bad it was. And then I left it, parked it for many years. And then, just then Facebook kind of got bigger. And so I spent time on Facebook forums and things. And I remember once reading, I think I was on like an adrenal fatigue forum or something like that. And someone said something which I'll never forget, which was like, you can't keep, like, when you have, because I was telling them I had Candida and all this, and I was doing Candida diets and I was taking antifungals. They were like, no, like, trying to treat Candida like that is like trying to kill flies on a shit pile, right? So the flies will just keep coming back. You have to do something to clean up the shit pile, the terrain of your body. And I was just like, oh, wow, no one had ever said that to me before. It was just like looking at something from a 180-degree different angle. And it stuck with me. And I just thought maybe liver flushing, maybe I just need to approach this in a different way. And so I went back to the drawing board. I really prepped hard. And this was, I guess, 2016, I started again. And I did my first liver flush. And I remember just the next day feeling a bit better. And that was the first time for, God knows how long that I actually woke up. I felt just a bit more lively. And I remember saying to my family, I feel like about 5% improvement. And for me, that was huge because, I just hadn't had that with anything and all the other protocols had been about adding things in, right? They were about, what, supplements you're taking or what diet you're doing or, something that you're adding, a vitamin, a mineral, whatever, a herb. This wasn't about any of those things. This was about taking something out of the body and allowing the equilibrium or the homeostasis to kind of reestablish.
That's amazing. And it was the exact same flush that you did in 2009, like the same ingredients and stuff,
I
or?
think so, but I may have taken it up a notch, I think. And then I did start to get really witchy with it and just to kind of just start like hacking it and just start, because I did, even after that first flush, notorious just dud flushes. So dud flushes where you do the prep and you take the ingredients in, you do the flush and nothing comes out except for water. And that happened to me again and again and again. And I had no idea why. I was like, why are all these other people managing to flush and I can't? And I would feel worse and worse. It wasn't like there was just, nothing happening and I would just feel the same. I actually got worse every time I flushed and nothing came out. And I realized that what was happening was that this sludge and stones or toxins or whatever was just being pushed and pushed and pushed further into the common bile duct and blocking the flow of bile. And that was when I kind of just led me onto a journey of discovery, realizing that what was going on was probably all the mycotoxins from years and years of very severe Candida overgrowth had really, screwed up my bile ducts and made it very difficult to release anything. So I really had to go on a long journey, even actually looking back, going for a full year without a single successful flush. So
Wow.
doing flushes and nothing coming out for a whole year.
How often? Like once a week or?
No, I think I was probably still sticking to the once a month. kind
Okay.
of method. But yeah, it was intensely frustrating, and it really did drive me almost to the point of just like, I don't want to be here anymore,
Yeah.
because I knew that liver flushing was this potentially amazing tool and I'd felt the benefits, but all of a sudden I just could not get it to work for me. And that was a very dark time actually.
Hmm. How, how do they differ from coffee enemas? Because I'd imagine listeners are wondering that because I did, I don't know, probably hundreds of those or something, or at least dozens, and the caffeine goes to the portal vein or all the
Mm.
things in the coffee and stimulates glutathione production, and there's all these benefits to it. But this is a totally different animal, right?
Yeah, I would say this is like a coffee enema with a jetpack on. So coffee enemas are great and they definitely have their place. They can be a little tricky for people with kind of delicate nervous system function. So I don't always recommend them to everybody, but they can be a great interim measure. And sometimes you can get stones out with a coffee enema. You know, sometimes you can see little fragments of cholesterol sitting on the surface. But if you imagine kind of what you see coming out after an off coffee enema, but sort of, times, sometimes by 100, um, essentially the flush pushes out an enormous quantity of bile, much more than a coffee enema. And as it does that, it's like a jet wash and it will shoot out anything sitting in the common bile duct. And that could be, sludge, cholesterol sludge. It could be old, thickened bile. It could be crystallized cholesterol with kind of mineral deposits in. It could be bile stones, pigmented stones, which are often green. It could be liver flukes. People expel parasites doing them
Mhm.
as well. So, yeah, it's a lot of junk and a lot of mold and fungus and Candida comes out as well. And that was a real eye opener to see all that stuff come out as well.
Wow. Is it does it stress the body if it's pushing out a lot more bile because then your body has to produce more, or is that not a problem for the body to just make more bile after?
It is stress. It can be stressful for the body, but not perhaps for that reason.
Mm.
So bile is replenished fairly quickly. Having said that, you're right. If someone is in a on some kind of really restrictive diet and not eating enough calories, that can really be a problem. So we definitely say don't do it if you're doing some kind of crazy restrictive diet or you're fasting for long periods. They would not be recommended. However, most people will replenish their bile relatively quickly. But of course, you do have to support yourself. If you're going to do this on a regular basis, yes, you have to eat a nutrient-dense diet, really look after your minerals, your electrolytes, for example. But it can be stressful because if you have passed a lot of toxicity all at once, the bile that comes out after the flush is also very toxic. And sometimes that can be quite, it can send somebody into a kind of Herxheimer reaction. So, yes, that's when you bring out the other tools like we talked about. The high dose zeolite can be extremely helpful for that, and just other kind of bile thinners and bile movers and things like that, just to keep everything moving and fluid.
Interesting. Could you go through like the ingredients and how it's done? Not the advanced method, but maybe maybe like the beginner.
Yeah, sure. So the beginner method is actually pretty straightforward and easy. So you're looking at for a week, you kind of need to eat clean, whatever that looks like for you. And the kind of biggest, culprits that you want to remove from the diet would be things like alcohol, excessive amounts of caffeine, excessive, big amounts of chocolate, for example, processed sugar, processed white flour. All those you'd want to remove. Fried foods are another big no-no because they really stress the liver out, and things like obviously toxic seed oils, for example. So you eat like that for a week, and then you want to take what's called a stone softener, and that is usually a source of L-malic acid, down kind of cholesterol fragments and stones in the liver and in the common bile duct. And you find malic acid naturally in things like apples and cherries. So some people drink apple juice, or you can take L-malic acid powder, or you can drink something like tart cherry juice. And you do that for a week. And then on flush day, you eat fairly normally in the morning, and have a simple lunch, limiting the amount of fat and animal protein that you're eating. And then you fast until 10 o'clock at night. And you take a couple of doses of Epsom salt. And the purpose of the Epsom salt is to relax and open up the bile duct so that it can pass, sort of stones and sludge comfortably without injury. And so you soften everything up, open it up with the Epsom salt, and then you drink a large amount of olive oil and grapefruit juice and lemon juice mixed. And that in the book by Andreas Moritz, he says 120 milliliters, which I think for you guys is 4 ounces.
Sounds right.
Yeah. But but with my method, people take more because it's just more effective. So people usually take about 150 to 180 milliliters, which I think is up to 6 ounces. And then what it does is it sends a very strong signal to the gallbladder to release a lot of bile all at once. And the lemon juice and grapefruit juice is very sour, and that speeds the passage of bile through the intestines, and also I think helps to create more of a rush. So it kind of gives power to the whole mixture. And then in the night, sometimes people pass stones, or sometimes they wait. It happens in the morning. Sometimes it can make you feel a bit sick, especially if you're passing a lot of toxins. Usually around 3 o'clock, people kind of sometimes feel a bit pukey, but not always. So yeah.
You mean 3 a.m. or?
Yeah, sorry, 3 a.m. Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like a plant medicine journey or something.
Yeah. It's pretty, I mean, so every flush is different. It really is. I mean, like they really vary. Some are very simple and straightforward. Others you might not pass very much at all, but there's always activity happening behind the scenes. So even if you do a flush and not much comes out, what it's done is softened stuff up and pushed it forward for the next flush. And so you might do a few flushes where little happens, and then you might get boom, a massive one with just loads of sludge and sand and stones and stuff. So yeah, it's always like a bit like, Christmas morning, waking up, opening your presents. What am I going to get today?
Can the timing differ? Like I know you gave the protocol of regular breakfast, light lunch, and then you fast till 10 p.m. Could someone like say fast the whole day and then start the flush first thing in the morning?
Yes, you could do that. I don't think there's necessarily an advantage for fasting all day, because what can happen is that you can end up drying out the bile ducts, which you don't necessarily want to do. With this method, you get the best of both worlds. So you eat something in the morning to lubricate the bile ducts and keep them open, and then you store up enough bile. I mean, some people do prefer to fast, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I think you can play around with it a little bit, but maybe you do the kind of basic protocol first a few times to get used to it, and then lots of people do start kind of experimenting with different methods and what works for them.
Okay. Yeah, I guess what I was trying to get at is so you don't have to have a late night. Like if you can bring it
Oh, I
earlier
see
in
what
the
you
day.
mean. Okay, yes, you can. You can do daytime flushes. So sometimes people will wake up in the morning, if they're, say, at the weekend or they're off for the day or whatever, they'll wake up in the morning, they'll take the Epsom salts as soon as they wake up, and then they'll do their flush at around midday. So that's perfectly possible.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'd be tired the next day if I'm like going through it at 3 a.m. and on the toilet.
Yeah. Yeah, it's possible. I mean, I'm quite hardcore now. Sometimes I'll do a flush, and I'll be up kind of part of the night, and then I'll get up in the morning at 7 to get my son to school. So
Wow, it's amazing. Have you ever played around with, like, I had a show, it must have been like 3 years ago now, on ozone and rectal ozone gas insufflation. Like Frank Schallenberger it's supposed to be identical almost to like the taking out the blood and ozonating it and putting it back in. Like it's almost identical to that going rectal with it. But I've had pretty amazing results. It's just a way different effect. I mean, you're getting ozonides and it's more of an oxygen thing. Just wondering if you've ever used that as like a, addition to your
Mm.
protocol or looked into it or anything.
I personally haven't. I have had a couple of clients who have and said it was very helpful. So I definitely think that, put it this way, the liver flush is going to respond to any additional things that you're doing to help it. So anything you're doing to sort of, facilitate movement or energy, lower inflammation, even things like nervous system work, nervous system regulation can help if it's, you're putting your body into rest and digest, for example, that can really help a liver flush. So generally speaking, anything that you can do like that, even, I mean, there are some amazing things that help, like even, for example, yoga. Yoga really helps because you're massaging the abdomen from doing the asanas and squeezing the liver and the gallbladder. And actually, I have had experiences where I've done hot yoga and then done like a water enema the next day and passed stones just
Wow.
from doing that. So it was amazing.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I don't know if you saw me hanging upside down on the yoga swing. I've
I did
been
see that.
off
Yeah.
and on into that for a while, and it's even just for the spinal decompression, but it feels like a total body
Yeah.
tune up where everything just functions better after inverting.
Actually, I must tell you, because this is a sort of nerdy thing that you might like to hear. So I also once discovered that going on a what we call in the UK a roundabout, I guess you guys would call it like a carousel or a
Mhm.
merry-go-round, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, I
Yeah.
noticed like doing, at fairgrounds where you get those crazy
Mhm.
rides that kind of send you round and round like the waltzers or something.
Yeah.
So I remember doing that and then the next day seeing stones. And I realized
Wow.
that, wow, the centrifugal force actually acts on the internal organs. And I was just like, wow, that's so cool. That's so cool. Like you could find a way to sort of make that happen, and then you could do like a coffee enema and then you just expel all this stuff afterwards. It just was quite
Wow.
exciting to me. You
That's
could do that.
incredible. Or get like a really fast car or something.
Yeah, yeah. But let's as long as we're not encouraging any
Right.
reckless experiments, we want to be responsible.
That's funny. Wow.
Yeah, it's really
That's
cool,
that's
right?
fascinating. Yeah.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, it looks like you're into red light too. You
Yeah,
use a lot of different things with it.
yeah. I bought I don't know if am I allowed to mention the brand?
Sure.
Okay. I bought a flex beam. So I really wanted a red light device for a while, but I didn't really know what to go with because there's just so many different brands out
Mhm.
there. But I read about flex beam in terms of kind of its strength and its portability. And it just seemed to have some really good credentials behind it. And I absolutely love it. It's amazing. It's really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, and I could see how you start to stack all this stuff together, and even if someone gets to just two or three things, they could have a massive um, improvement in their symptoms. And
Yeah,
uh,
definitely.
so you mentioned castor oil earlier, not really having an effect, and you kind of lumped it into like the witchy category. I had a few listeners that were curious your thoughts because I've only done them once, and I thought about having a show on it, but I just didn't really feel anything from it.
Mm,
Um, so it's like a warm pack that you soak
mm,
with this oil,
hmm
right? And you put it over the liver. And I mean, some people get huge results. I don't know why some people do and some people don't. What's the difference? Like
mm.
maybe is it like the flushes where you just have to be super consistent with it or
I don't know. I think maybe it's maybe just how responsive your body is, or it could be. It could be. I mean, my nutrition teacher used to say that it introduces light into the body, but at the time, I didn't really know much about kind of light or sort of, the science of light. So I didn't really kind of understand. I mean, the first time I used it, it just made me go to the toilet.
yeah.
Um, so, and thereafter, I think I used it again and it didn't do anything for me. But I think it's very relaxing. I mean, some people find it very, very, relaxing for the nervous system. Um, in general, you have to be a bit careful for anything that kind of that moves bile before a flush. So one of the kind of approach, or one of the sort of principles of liver flushing is that on the day of the flush, you have to save up the bile. You don't want to spend it. So, for example, you wouldn't want to do a coffee enema on the day of the flush. You might want to do one the day after you've done your flush, but not on the day because it spends too much bile. So the idea is you save it up. So I probably wouldn't recommend a castor oil pack either, but you could do a castor oil pack after you've taken the oil drink, for example.
That makes sense. Yeah. Interesting. Um, I I once dated a girl, I think I mentioned this on my show and other liver shows, that didn't have a gallbladder. And it's
Okay.
interesting with TCM, the emotional connection, right? Like uh
Mm,
I think angers with the liver and gallbladder, I'm pretty sure is one of the
huge,
big
huge.
emotions. And she was a very angry person. This is
Yeah,
years
yeah,
ago. And
yeah.
have you worked with clients that had their gallbladder removed? Can they still use this protocol or
It's tricky.
how's
So some detox coaches do work with liver flushing with people who haven't had who no longer have a gallbladder. I personally don't. It is a little bit risky. Well, it's not risky. It's just it could be very frustrating because okay, it's not risky in the sense that anything's going to necessarily get stuck, but you don't have the concentration of bile reserves that you need in order to really, as I said before, jet wash this stuff out of the bile ducts. So I would say it's not, it would not be something that I would want to kind of supervise. But I do know that in the Andreas Moritz book, he does talk about people can successfully flush without a gallbladder. But my feeling is, and this is just a hunch, that people are a lot more toxic now than they were 30 years ago when he wrote that book, because he also, I think, massively underestimated how many flushes people would need in order to be stone free in quotation marks. And I actually think you kind of look at whatever figure he talks about in the book and probably times it by 10.
wow. Interesting. That makes sense, though. I mean, we've had just more and more toxicity being added
Yeah.
since then. What time did he write the book? Was it a few decades
Because,
ago? It was
yeah, it's like maybe it's the early 90s, or I
so
think
what?
it's maybe
Wow.
around 1992 or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that was a much different time for sure.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And as you say, there's just so many layers upon layers of stacking, toxicity. And of course, it's generational, because
right.
we're inheriting, the kind of the generation Gen X or whatever are now having kids, and it's those toxicities and deficiencies are being passed down generationally. So that's why we're seeing so many more problems at an earlier age
Mm.
now.
Yeah, yeah. I was talking to my friend up here on the mountain that's having gut stuff, and she was telling me her history in Arkansas living on a farm and all the just thousands of chickens and the chemicals that were used and stuff and pesticide exposure, and that could just be stuck in the body for years and years, right? And if someone's not taking binders or they're not
Mm.
giving their liver some love, it just wreaks havoc on the organs. Like you just said, you mentioned the bile ducts and jet washing them.
Mm.
I'd imagine that if you don't do that, the toxins have no way to escape, right? And so they're just a chronic source of oxidative stress, stressing out
Absolutely.
organs and other organs and glands and
Yeah. Yeah. And it's quite difficult, I think, to get rid of some of that toxicity. I mean, yes, you can use binders, but a lot of it's just going to remain in the liver because that's what its job is to sequester those toxins and hide them away from circulation. But yeah, I mean, for example, glyphosate is such a massive issue now, and that really, messes up a lot of the liver detox enzyme pathways that also then metabolize and deal with other toxins. I was reading about the issue with glyphosate and the liver pathway that deals with retinol, for example, and converts it to retinoic acid. That's massively affected by glyphosate and can cause, some of these neutral substances to actually almost have a toxic effect on the liver. So yeah, it's really interesting because it's not just about individual toxins, but it's about how they, contribute and kind of compound each other and the actions that they have cumulatively.
Yeah, absolutely. You might know I'm a big fan of melatonin therapy or supplementation, and if it's interesting if you look up studies on melatonin and glyphosate, it protects the liver from building up fat, like lipid accumulation, and protects from reproductive, like testosterone issues from glyphosate. It's amazing. I mean, we have all these solutions, but um, yeah, ideally. Uh, we probably use we don't just take supplements, we're using
Mm,
things in addition to it, right?
mm.
Like flush.
Yeah, I didn't even know that someone could take 50 milligrams of melatonin, Matt. So that was quite a surprise for me. Did you not have like a big healing reaction or some kind of herx from taking that big a dose of melatonin?
Only during the day, but I never took high dose during the day. It was just as an experiment. Because the theory is if you're still getting the light exposure, then you're not going to trick the system. Like, so it's safe to take during the day, especially for people with
Oh,
cancer and stuff like that. But no, I never had any reaction like that. I mean, I think a lot of people do, especially if they get up into the grams. It's
yeah.
Doris Lowe's work, and I interviewed Russell Ryder that wrote the melatonin book, and they've written clinical papers together. But she uses, you know, with COVID patients and stuff, her recommendations are up 5 to 10 to 12 grams of melatonin, where
Oh,
you
no
really need
way.
you need powdered form to do that. I mean, that
Okay.
you'd be taking 5 of my bottles or something of the Mito
I
Life.
have to I have to look into this. This is really
Uh,
interesting. I didn't even know you could dose it at that higher dose because often it's,
uh,
recommended for kids with autism and ADHD and
yeah,
yeah, so yeah, I'm interested.
yeah. I think it would go really well with the liver flush. It's super hepatoprotective, and um, yeah, like we were just talking about, we're being inundated with just so many things, and I like not living in a bubble, and still living my life, and I'll go out and
Agreed.
drink tap water and
Yeah.
whatever, occasionally, but
I'm totally with you. I just think we cannot, I do rail against orthorexia. I refuse to become kind of orthorexic. I mean, I've had to live pretty kind of, within certain boundaries, I suppose, for a long time with my multiple chronic illnesses. But now, I go out, I drink alcohol, I can go partying again, things that I didn't, I wasn't able to do before. And so I'm very much a fan of this is to support us living a life. It's not to become regimented and super restrictive and replacing having a normal life. So I'm with you on that.
I love it. I wanted to ask you about Candida, because this is something that I was fruitarian at one time, like 20, 30 bananas a day, fruit for lunch, and that's all for years. And then I was keto, and I've tried a lot of different things, and got into turpentine and sugar cubes. My YouTube video on that went viral years ago. Never had a podcast on it, funny enough. But I had some,
I love turpentine. I
yeah,
use
I
it in
had
my practice. Yeah.
that's awesome. I've been feeling the pullback to it because I had I didn't feel any detriment from it. I felt good. I mean, even some euphoria at some point from taking it.
That might be because it's a solvent as well. So it really kind of helps to, yeah, kind of lubricate and open up the bile ducts and, dissolve fat and cholesterol. So it's brilliant. Yeah, I'm a big fan of turpentine.
Do you do the because it was do the I forget the brand, Diamond
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
Yeah.
Diamond G Forest.
That's what it is. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah,
Do
I
you
do
do the
use diamond. Yeah.
okay.
No, I don't. I don't use the sugar cube. I don't. I kind of. It's an interesting idea. But I think most people with Candida or fungal overgrowth, they don't. Their pathogens or their overgrowth doesn't need much encouragement to come out. It's almost like the sugar cube idea is this weird kind of idea. It's like, well, they're in hibernation, these pathogens, so you want to sort of tempt them out like a mouse with a piece of cheese. And I think possibly it's not, you don't have to do that with it. It's just like just take it.
Makes sense. So you just take it straight with the dropper? Is that how you do it? Or
I would put it in something. So, yeah, put it in some juice or some lemon
okay.
juice. Yeah, but it's really good, and I think it's definitely something that you can use for Candida and fungal overgrowth. But sometimes microorganisms do get resistant to things, so it's good to kind of change things up. Or yeah, but you can use it to prep for a liver flush for sure.
Interesting. Are we talking about like drops, like 5 or 6 drops kind of at a
Yeah,
time? Okay.
yeah, yeah. I
Not a
mean, you can
tablespoon.
you well, you can high dose with it, but then you read about people who kind of always have to take it to the extreme
Yeah.
degree, and then they get like eye twitching or some
Yeah.
weird reaction. I'm just like, why take that much?
Hmm.
You don't need to. Like half a teaspoon is probably about as much as I would recommend for most people.
That makes sense. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, since the magnesium sulfate is a part of the protocol, have you had any people report topical use accelerating the results, like Epsom salt baths? Like I just added 20 pounds to my jacuzzi. I'm going to add another 10, which is really cool. And then I have 950 in my float tank downstairs. And
Doesn't it give you loose bowels?
it does not, surprisingly. Yeah. Uh,
Really?
but maybe I need
Wow.
some liver flushes. I don't know. Maybe I'm just plugged
That's
up.
I think it's a really interesting approach. It's possible. Um, you would need to be a little bit careful on flush day because you wouldn't want to end up with hypomagnesemia. So you wouldn't want to end up taking, 2 tablespoons orally and then soaking in it. You could end up with some kind of punami, which could be a bit uncomfortable.
Makes
You wouldn't want to go into the flush super dehydrated either. So yeah, you'd probably have to exercise a little bit of caution. But I think cumulatively it could be helpful. Yeah.
hmm Yeah, I would imagine it would, because there's this relationship to the other electrolytes, right? Like especially potassium. So
Yeah.
I wonder if you could balance it out with that or something.
Yeah,
Uh,
potassium is always a big one actually that gets knocked out after a flush. And so yeah, I always recommend kind of, get some coconut water in and, have that after a flush because often that's when, if people feel exhausted or washed out, that's often a potassium issue.
Did you ever get into like the salt packet supplements? Like I was on those for a year or something, and just intuitively I just got off of them. And I've been on Shilajit for years,
Hmm.
pretty much since 2010, and that's a great electrolyte source. And I basically just do Shilajit, Icelandic white flake salt, and Kintone. That's basically the
Hmm.
majority of my electrolyte intake. But it sounds like you're more on the natural, like fruit juice, coconut water. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, salt, obviously sodium
Mhm.
plays a big, role in that. And if someone was kind of really depleted and had kind of ostensibly kind of weak adrenal activity, you'd want to make sure that they were replacing their sodium. But I haven't drilled down to the finer granular detail, excuse the pun, of different kind of types of salt. But generally, I'd say just, yeah, a good quality sea salt is really important. And yeah, salt food to taste, and put it in your water and your juice if you have kind of a severe sort of adrenal fatigue.
Yeah, the nervous system stuff is interesting to me because it seems like a lot of what people could do is free, like just less screen time. I know for me, when I take, just it's my job, so I'm on looking at screens all the time, and just even being off of it for a few hours, I feel so much lighter.
Mm.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think nervous system stuff is really important for, balancing the kind of the pro kind of almost the stuff we're doing with liver flushing or kind of, the diets. It's all, quite sometimes can feel a little forced. And so it's really good to just, help the nervous system get back into balance. So I'm a big fan of kind of things like tapping, EFT, energy work, just being able to harness your own, ability to relax, bring down tension, things like the pulling down technique, which is something that I discovered from somebody else, and is in some of the HTMA balancing
Mhm.
literature. Dr.
Wilson, right?
Lawrence
Yeah,
Wilson,
yeah.
yeah. And some of the energy practices that I do, just learning to tune in to or noticing where people are holding on to tension, and just, simple practices like that, just to become aware, because, it always start nervous system stuff. It has to be foundational. And it is about noticing where one is carrying tension and just using simple exercises to just send that tension down from the head, down to the feet and into the floor, a bit like grounding, like there's earthing and then there's, kind of energetic grounding as well. So, sometimes I think we can get so bogged down in, take this supplement or do this stack or this protocol or whatever. It's just, just learning to just let tension go in the body is so important. So yeah, there's no point pushing a stressed out body into detox, because often a stressed out body won't detoxify effectively. Yeah, you have to put the stressed out body into rest and repair first, so it feels safe enough to detoxify.
Yeah, I think it was a year and a half, 2 years ago, I realized that I was dealing with pretty bad constipation and I was doing everything normally and as I've done for years. And it was stress induced. It was just the life situation that I was in, that I had to make some tough decisions and shift things around and move and stuff. And it's amazing because within a couple days of making that hard decision, that was uncomfortable, my bowel movements came back like literally in less than 24 hours. So
Yeah.
it's the nervous system's amazing how it affects that.
Absolutely. And that's why often you see people kind of, with hypothyroidism, for example, is, constipation is often present. When the body is kind of down regulated, then, elimination doesn't happen. So it's, you can work on that in different ways, but definitely, yeah, just being able to help the body relax and step away from the intense stress of kind of living in the 21st century is really, really important. If you don't address that, then you can end up going round and round on a hamster wheel, can't you?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I often tell people too, if you just like, to me, reducing stress and the weight on the nervous system is like the number one thing to focus on. So like
Yeah.
maybe not taking life so seriously. I mean, none of us are going to make it out of here alive. It's like,
Agreed. And then of course, the other thing is just, which I often come back to, especially with a lot of my female clients, is just asking them, are you eating enough calories?
Mhm.
Like just simply, are you eating enough food to fuel the metabolic processes that your body needs and the detoxification processes? You eating enough protein? The liver needs protein to detoxify. And that is a big one, actually. A lot of, particularly female clients, under eating and not even meaning to undereat, but because they're kind of obsessed with healthy eating, that whole orthorexia thing that, I was mentioning before. I got really into the work of a researcher called Matt Stone. I don't know if you have, do you know him?
I didn't
Do you
get
know of
into his
him?
work, but I know, yeah, I know he was back in the day, he was producing a lot of material and
I love him
into
so
it. Yeah.
much. He's an absolute hero of mine. He's not really on social media very much anymore, although he does now have a YouTube channel again. But I gobbled everything up that he ever put out, and he was quite controversial
Mhm.
because he did have this idea, this kind of axiom was eat for heat. And he
Mhm.
basically maintains that in a stressed out context, calories are more important than nutrients. And when you come from maybe a slightly kind of obsessive orthorexic perspective, that almost seems like heresy. But actually, I've seen it to be true so many times. And in my own case, it was true because I was on a low carb diet for many, many years because I had this Candida overgrowth, and I thought maybe that was the only way to treat it. And my period stopped and my cycle stopped.
Mhm.
And I was freezing cold all the time, and I was always hungry, and I was always angry, and I was always miserable. And yeah, I read the work of Matt Stone, and I actually had a consultation with him back in, I don't know when this was, 2010 maybe. And he said, hey, just, you just want to go and eat a bunch of pancakes and, put some maple syrup on them. And I was horrified. I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do that? But I did, I did. And within a month, I was pregnant.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was inspired by Ray Peat, right? I mean,
Yes, Ray
mhm.
Peat. Broda Barnes, a lot of work on thyroid health,
Mhm.
temperature. He did a weird thing called RBTI as well, which I've
Mhm.
never quite worked out what that is, but it was to do with like certain biofeedback, temperature regulation, blood pressure, or measuring your pee for something. I don't know what it was. But yeah, he's one of those really interesting people that, amalgamates a lot of different kind of dietary and nutritional principles and was just used a lot of common sense and
Yeah.
debunked a lot of, mythology around health and nutrition and stuff. So yeah, massive fan.
Yeah. I'll have to look into it more. That's funny. The calories are more important than nutrients. Yeah, I'm sure that would trigger so many people on social media, health
Yeah.
influencers and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's so true because the thing is like if you don't eat enough calories, it doesn't really matter how nutritious your food is, as evidenced by, loads of really, deficient looking raw vegans or
Yeah.
whatever,
Mhm.
just
Yeah.
flooding their body with nutrients, but they're not eating sufficient calories, they're not eating sufficient protein or whatever. So yeah, I mean it's coming back to fundamentals, isn't it? I think it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And like kind of connecting this with the liver health stuff, like you mentioned at the start, that it helps metabolize fats and carbohydrates. And my theory with even white processed sugar, or whatever, carbohydrates in general, that they get blamed, and maybe Matt Stone talks about this. I know Ray Pete did too, but it's more so if we can't utilize it to make it energy, that's where the problem lies, and then
Yeah,
that's probably where you feed Candida. So
yeah,
it's, sugar is getting blamed where maybe someone just doesn't have good bile flow, right? And they actually just aren't processing it, or they don't have good liver functions. So they aren't processing the
yeah.
sugar properly.
Or they have, severe dysbiosis, in which case it's very difficult for, any kind of carbohydrate not to get kind of used as food for those overgrowing bacteria and yeah, cause I mean, kind of my sort of study and research into this whole area has kind of shown that once people are in a low energy availability state and they have the beginnings of an overgrowth, it's quite difficult for them to get back to baseline without doing something to fundamentally shift that terrain. Um, and it's funny because you get like the terrain forward people sort of saying, well, the bugs, they're not the problem. You have to change the terrain or you change the nutritional status of the organism and then the bugs go away. But my kind of insight and sort of research into this kind of suggests it's not true. Like if you have an entrenched gut infection and you are in a low energy availability state, you can't really eat your way out of that situation. You actually have to do something quite fundamental to flush out the bugs.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I Especially during the COVID times, I saw all these arguments going around of it's really about the terrain, it's not about the germ theory, and Pasteur, and went through the history of why we pasteurize milk and all that, and it just seemed like a very like emotional argument. And I just kept thinking over the years, why not both? Why does it have to be this black and white? It's only the terrain theory. Just take care of the terrain and everything else will fix itself. And there's no such thing as a pathogen. It's a myth. It just seemed very extreme to me.
Yeah, I'm totally with you,
Mhm.
100%. I think there's room for both. And it would be great if we could just kind of nourish the host and all these other things would go away. But that would be to kind of underplay all the different factors that have made our world very toxic. That may have been enough kind of, 100 years ago or whatever, but now it's just so we are, at a stage where, as soon as you're born, you're kind of is a whole host of assaults are introduced into, a newborn baby's system. And they've inherited whatever's been passed on to them gestationally and through delivery. And so their health is a reflection of the maternal health. And if the maternal health and particularly the gut flora is not healthy, that's going to be passed on to, so you're from the get-go, there's just so many ways in which our terrain is compromised quite early on, and that then through diet and through all of the external stressors and environmental pollutants and contaminants that we know about. So it is a little bit, I would say, naive to just postulate this kind of almost ancestral this argument about kind of nourish everybody with ancestral foods and we'll all be perfectly healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's amazing that people think that we start with a blank slate, but no, most people actually are born behind, right? Because their mom had nutrient deficiencies, whether it was iron or whatever mineral deficiency. So we have some catching up to do, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think we're definitely seeing an epidemic of it, even in our youngest generations of, mental health and, autoimmune and, all the things that we know about. So yeah, it's not simple, and we're definitely going to have to evolve kind of, more sophisticated approaches to health in the future if we're going to try and help people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So what are like what are some signs of stagnant bile flow and just suboptimal liver? I mean, could you say it's almost every symptom that people complain about?
Maybe. Yeah, I think it's a lot, but we would say kind of emotionally, I suppose, anger, that came up with what you were saying before. Everything from sort of, bad breath, body odor, migraines, headaches, digestive symptoms, fungal overgrowth, SIBO, SIFO, small intestinal fungal overgrowth and bacterial overgrowth. What else? Bloating, constipation, certain kind of autoimmune conditions, probably blood sugar regulation conditions, diabetes, problems with cholesterol metabolism, blood sugar regulation,
Would you
hormonal
say,
issues.
sorry, would you say diarrhea as well? Would that be in the same? Because you mentioned
Yeah,
constant.
yeah,
Is it?
because there's something there that's about absorption. So potentially the gut can be inflamed, and not absorbing properly. And therefore, if there's inflammation there, then there's probably not enough bile being produced, because one of the functions of bile is to lower inflammation in the GI and hydrate it. And it provides this very anti-inflammatory, hydrating fluid. And so, yeah, I would definitely say alternating diarrhea, constipation, any kind of IBS is definitely a sign probably of stress in the liver.
Yeah, that's a good list. What are your thoughts on hydration? Because that's another funny topic on social media where it gets so black and white, where it's the spring water versus the RO and distilled, where I'm like, well, there's a third option that's better. But
Hmm.
some people say, you should never drink plain water. I've seen a guy say
Mm.
that on social media. It should always have something in it, whether it's salt or
Mm.
fruit juice, and just
Hmm.
so many opinions. But from my experience, like when I limit water just as an experiment and I just drink less water in a day, my bowels don't feel the same. My gut doesn't feel as good. It just doesn't feel right to not drink plain water personally. But you could have a different opinion. I'm just curious your thoughts on
I
drinking
think
water.
I definitely think people can overhydrate. And actually, ironically, when you overhydrate, you actually end up dehydrated. So I think that's something I see quite a lot, is people drinking too much. And so if I see someone who's got kind of adrenal fatigue, nervous system problems, always cold, for example, I always say, how much are you drinking? And if it's 2 liters, as it often is, sometimes more, I'll try and get them to drink less. Um, so that's my main concern is kind of I'm maybe more concerned about that rather than the quality. Although having said that, of course, if someone's just drinking tap water, I'll usually raise that with them as an issue. I haven't done a deep dive into lots of different types of water. So I have a distiller. I use distilled and I use fulvic minerals. And experiment with different types of electrolytes to put that back in the water. I love the way the water tastes. It tastes super clean. I do suspect it's not as hydrating. So that is one thing with distilled water, because essentially you've taken everything out of it. So yeah, I don't know. I've no idea about RO. It's one of those things that I've just not really looked into, but I would defer to you on that topic. I think you're probably much more knowledgeable than me. But yeah, I try and get clients to clean up their water source at the very minimum.
No, that's great. No, yeah, that it's just one of the focuses with supplements I started back at the beginning. And yeah, it's my understanding that distilled doesn't take out the acids, because that post carbon filter, like I used Mega Home for years, and then another one, stainless steel one, I can't remember the brand. But yeah, the acids from like natural and unnatural sources, I believe that those get vaporized and then they end up in the product water, which it's not going to kill you right away, but probably over
Oh no.
decades, you know.
Oh no, my distiller's going to kill me.
More fear, right? No. But yeah, just the sulfuric and nitric acid from air pollution that does end up in the water supply. And it's just something that I've kind of raised awareness about, especially the last 8 years online. So I like RO with deionization, with sediment, carbon, and then remineralized at the end. So that's kind of like the filter that I designed. But
you've evolved a very, very impressive whole process around this. Then I can see that you're, yeah, I mean, you lost me kind of halfway through that, so I'm impressed.
Well, I think the key is at least filter your water, and that's a great place to start. But
absolutely.
My neighbor I just met here in the woods, they told me they're using a Berkey, and I was trying not to go on a long rant over the phone and berate her. Well, I got my parents off that in 2012, but
wow. Okay.
The gravity filter isn't. Yeah, there's. Anything's better than a gravity filter, pretty much is what I'll say.
Right.
But no, great points about how people can drink too much. And I mean, currently here in North Idaho, I've been using my wood stove pretty much 24/7. So the relative humidity in my house is hovering probably in the 20s, which is relatively low. But I can imagine if someone's somewhere else, more tropical or whatever, Hawaii, I don't know, Australia, I don't know where the
UK?
UK, yeah, the humidity is probably fairly.
It's so high in this house, like in my house, it's the humidity in my room, or just up here, I think fluctuates between 70 and 80.
Wow.
Yeah, it's bad. So that's a good point. So maybe people who live in those sorts of places don't need quite as much water.
Yeah, and me just talking for 2 hours or whatever, you definitely let go some water. So yeah, there's a lot of factors with dehydration and individual situations. But I wanted to ask you, I don't know if this is kind of random, but up here we get amazing, like fresh, raw, unpasteurized apple juice in the store because there's so many orchards up here. Is it beneficial without a flush to just have that malic acid coming in?
Yeah, I think so. There are certain kind of contextual sort of provisos to that. So, for example, I wouldn't recommend that somebody take a lot of malic acid if they already were prone to gallbladder attacks, because you can end up moving stuff in the common bile duct that can then trigger gallbladder attacks. And of course, apple juice can be a bit tricky for some people because it does contain quite a lot of sugar. If they've got a fungal overgrowth, it's maybe not the best choice. Tart cherry juice can be very good. So it's got less sugar than apple juice, and it's also quite concentrated in malic acid. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm a massive fan of just eating apples, to be honest, because you've got the pectin, you've got the fiber there. The fiber helps with binding bile acids in the gut, and helping to feed colonic flora, short chain fatty acid production, so all that good stuff. So I'm a massive fan of fiber, which is quite funny because, for a long time I didn't have the kind of gut that could tolerate fiber, and now I probably eat maybe 40 grams of or 50 grams of fiber a day. So, and I find it really, really helpful. So yeah, it's
Mm.
interesting that that's kind of changed. But yeah, eating
Mm.
apples is just great for liver health.
That's awesome. I'm gonna have to plant a ton of apple trees up here on my mountain.
Lovely.
Yeah, good point about the fiber. That's one thing that I wanted to talk to you about. I interviewed a guy last year that made a genetically modified bacteria. It's kind of a high tech thing, but it it's a powder you can mix into like your beverages, coffee, juice, whatever, and then it's a slow release of 5 to 10 grams of fiber throughout the day. And I think it's soluble fiber.
Mm.
And it's leaven sucrase, I think it is. Um, but I've just felt kind of a stress reduction effect just having even just 5 to 10 grams more a day. And so, but yeah, I try to get in veggies and all the stuff that's getting thrown out by the carnivore people, right? With all the anti-nutrients.
Yes. I tend to think that, a lot of that argumentation comes from people who just don't feel good on plant foods, and so they construct a kind of a posteriori argument about why fiber is bad, but actually it's about the fact that they can't tolerate fiber. And I was one of those people, and I remember, talking about, low carb diets as if they were, manna from heaven. But you can't deny the science, really. There's a lot of science behind the importance of fiber, and you can't really just kind of toss that out of the window ideologically.
Mhm.
Nutrition is become greatly kind of ideologically contested, but essentially it's a science. And so fiber, it shouldn't be ideological.
Yeah. Yeah, and even getting into like the phytochemicals and the polyphenols, and I'm
Hmm.
uh I'm planting a 40 foot geodesic dome up here, and all my lettuce is sprouting and beets and parsnips and carrots and all this stuff, and it's just insane to think that that's bad for you. It's kind of wild.
Do you eat beans and legumes, or are you not a fan of those, Matt?
So I interviewed Karen Hurd, what was it, 2 years ago now or something? And
I heard it. I actually share
oh,
that one
cool.
with my clients. So when
Oh,
my
cool.
clients do my courses, I share your podcast with Karen.
That's awesome. I need to start experimenting with. I'm very slow with experiments lately, just with all the mountain stuff I've been doing. But for a while, I was just doing the beans, eating canned beans because I'm busy. Just the
Yeah.
pre cooked whatever, just with butter and salt. And I was
Hmm.
trying that after I interviewed her and felt a little unbalanced. Maybe I just wasn't eating protein around it enough. And so I did finally buy it. Now that I'm on grid, I bought a electric, what's it called, instant pot type thing
Hmm.
where you just press the
Yeah.
buttons. And
Yeah.
since
I
I'm
love those.
since I'm bachelor life, my friend Matthew is like, it's so easy, you just eat from that for
Yeah.
days. And so I'm thinking of getting into like the chili thing, just
Hmm.
because I could eat that for days just alone. So beans, ground beef, veggies, I'd be
Yeah.
happy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a massive fan of beans, and I do try and get, people to eat more beans if they can. But of course, again, it's very much based on the individual constitution. And if someone's gut is not ready for beans, their gut will tell them pretty quickly, and that just, means that they're not ready for that at that time, and that's okay. So you can, experiment with beans, but soluble fiber has been, yeah, amazing for me. And it's just so helpful for just satiety, blood sugar regulation. It gets such an unfair rap. And I'm glad to be on the side of kind of people trying to rehabilitate the humble legume.
Yeah, the stress reducing effect is just to me the most fascinating because I think Karen talks about how it like soaks up excess like adrenaline, and it'll
Hmm.
bind basically these stress hormones so you could
Yeah.
excrete them. And I feel that even like back when I was dealing with the constipation and just getting bowel movement starting again, it's like an immediate reduction in psychological stress levels. Like
That's amazing.
Mhm.
You're obviously very sensitive because your body's a bit like a barometer. You seem to register these things quite quickly.
Right.
Well,
You have
that's
to be
good.
into
I think it's a good a sign of good health, actually, to be that kind of quickly reactive to things. It's because for many years I didn't really react to anything, and I think that's because my poor body was so sort of sluggish. And I'm a bit like
Mhm.
more like you now, which is I respond to things quite quickly. I can usually tell whether something's going to help me or not pretty quickly.
That's awesome. Yeah, then I think it's from there it's so much easier to see, your experiments could be a little more dialed in and precise with the next steps that you take, where
Yeah,
you're more likely to have good results from doing
yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Um, I I think I mentioned this earlier. What are your thoughts on like TUDCA supplements? And because I've heard people high dosing that supplement and just releasing stones from that alone, just
Mm.
taking like tons
Yeah.
of capsules in the morning.
Yeah, yeah. So I think it depends how well your kind of bile flow is functioning. So some people seem to do well on it when they take it with food, and then other people experiment taking it at night to work on sludge overnight. And I know that Adam Marafiotti of Lifeblood talks about having done that and having had really good success with that. But then other people have to be a little bit more careful, and sometimes if they try that, it gives them like a gut pain. So I
Hmm.
think it's really individual. But if someone was coming to me and wanting to try it, I would always initially suggest trying it with food. It's one of those supplements that I have never really responded to either way. So I prefer something like Jarrow's bile acid factors, which are more concentrated and stronger. But again, you have to be quite careful with those because they can be, I think, so alkaline that they can be a bit burning on the intestinal tract. I'm more a fan of bitters, so I like herbal bitters and I use lots of different types of bitters. And yeah, I find those more effective for kind of bile moving. But some people love Tudka. I think it's just one of those things that you kind of have to experiment with to see if it works for you.
Yeah, I've thought about adding bitters back in. I was doing Quicksilver years ago, like the number 9, and they have with the gentian root, and they have,
Hmm.
and it tastes pretty good. It actually doesn't taste bad.
It's probably not strong enough, I would say. So if it
Uh,
tastes good, it's probably not doing very much. Bitters
Interesting.
should taste really bitter or sometimes downright disgusting. Um, and yeah, but I always encourage people to make their own. So if you can make your own, they're usually much stronger and much more effective than commercial bitters because some of those commercial bitters is just like, oh, that would taste so nice in a cocktail, but it's not going to do very much just on its own.
Interesting. So like kind of like tincture style, or what's the
Yeah.
recipe? Okay.
Just vodka,
Oh, cool.
vodka,
Cool.
vodka, and your whatever your herb is of choice, and you can do it 1 to 1, or you can do it 2 parts alcohol to 1 part herb. And again, just going back to that whole kind of witchy stuff, I'm a big proponent of. I guess my style of coaching is to actually just hand the technique and the knowledge over to people rather than say be super prescriptive and say this is how you do it. It's like this is a lifestyle. I'm going to just, teach you the basics and then you can go away and start experimenting. So once people know how to make a tincture, then there's so many bitter herbs out there with pharmacological properties and cholagogue properties that, it's like the world's your oyster, just start experimenting and doing it yourself. But they're always much better and much more effective if you make them yourself from scratch.
Makes sense. Yeah. With 100 acres now, I'm excited to forage this summer. And I used to tincture nettle root. I really miss that.
Nettle's really
For
nice.
prostate health for men, it's amazing,
Yeah.
and just testosterone and stuff. Yeah, that's a bitter one.
Yeah. I love nettle. Nettle is a great herb. Super
Yeah.
good for UTIs and bladder health and all that good stuff, that the water stuff.
Yeah. Uh, well, we have a bunch of questions. Do you want to get through some of the
Yeah,
listener questions that they sent in?
yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. Well, we covered a bunch of them. Turpentine. There's here's one. Thoughts on hair tissue mineral analysis testing and mineral balancing to restore gut health.
Yes, I think it's a great idea. I think restore gut health is possibly a slightly vague term, and it depends what you mean. If the gut health issue exists because you've got a deficiency of digestive secretions and there's a lot of inflammation there, potentially dysbiosis and overgrowth, then HTMA alone is not going to fix your gut, but it is definitely a good tool because it can support you holistically through all the other stages of detoxification.
Yeah, it's funny. I've had a bunch of shows on it, and they all have different opinions on the cadence of coffee enemas. And I think one guest, yeah, Rick Malter, he was not a fan. He's like, we don't even need to do them, just sauna, which I
Mhm.
thought was kind of nice because I don't like, butt stuff. It's not fun for me. But,
Butt stuff.
but the way you feel after it makes it worth it with different protocols. And I think once people experience that, they're like, okay, the uncomfortableness, but just the daily coffee enemas seems super overkill to me, like that.
I agree with
Uh,
you. I
yeah.
agree with you. I think coffee enemas have their place. I don't promote them as something to do more than once a week or twice a week at the most. And, we look back on kind of Gerson therapy and they're doing them several times a day. I'm just like, wow, how depleting is that?
Yeah.
Like, way to lose your minerals.
Yeah. Yeah. You better be taking a lot of pills to replenish from that.
Yeah.
Um, did touch on this a little bit, but guy asked impacts of psychiatric medication and a vegan fruitarian diet on the liver. I guess two kind of separate
Mhm.
things. Uh,
So medication, again, it's a kind of catch-all. It depends what medication for how long. Some medication, is probably more detrimental than others. Antibiotics, I think in particular, if you're on regular antibiotics, that's possibly one of the worst. But again, if you are going into liver flushing and you are on medication, that's okay. You just have to do your best. I've had clients on, SSRIs and, on kind of who've been on birth control, who are on all sorts of different medications for chronic or autoimmune illness, and they just have to be on those medications. And then, at some point, maybe they'll be able to reduce their medication, but you I think you can't if you desperately need to do liver flushing, then do it. I mean, Andreas Moritz says you've got to come off all your medication before you can do liver flushing, but I just think that's frankly dangerous advice, and I would never advise that. The second part of the question, which was about a vegan fruitarian diet, that's a bit of a no from me because it can be depleting doing regular liver flushing, and it's not just a one and done. I've been in this process now for 8 years. I've done over 300 liver flushes, and it's it can be depleting if you don't know what you're doing or if you push your body too hard too fast. Because essentially you're upregulating all your detoxification enzyme pathways, and you need to support those with good nutrition. And yeah, I would say don't couple it with like a really restrictive diet or fasting. That would not be recommended.
well, that's a great segue because a woman asked, can you please ask her for tips for those that feel really wiped out for days after just doing a single coffee enema? Sounds like they need to build their system up maybe first.
Yeah, yeah, I would. I would say that if you feel that way after a coffee enema, it does suggest to me a degree of adrenal fatigue, stress there. So I would be looking at really building up with, a super nutritious diet. And yeah, maybe get an HTMA to see where you can support your mineral status. And then yeah, I mean, liver flushes can be depleting, but it's a bit chicken and egg, because you've got to start somewhere. And I have had very sick clients who can do the flush, but yeah, you have to kind of try and support the kidneys. You have to make sure they're going to the toilet, the colon is working. You might want to do water enema if they're very constipated, for example. So it's just, yeah, open up the detox pathways, support nutritionally, and then look at doing liver flushing. Don't necessarily jump into it straight away.
Mm. Yeah, this morning a friend of mine was telling me that a big account on Instagram uh, that's been anti-supplement has chronic health issues reached out to her, and we're both pro supplement. It's just kind of funny that I think a lot of people, even health educators, are depleted, and some of them are ones that are preaching that we can get everything from food, which is
Mm,
interesting. So,
yeah. And sometimes it's not a simple either or, because
mhm,
actually, even though liver flushing can be depleting in the short term, in the long term, it starts to allow you to absorb your
makes sense.
nutrition much better. And so, that's what happened with me, is that I was so toxic that that was what was depleting me. And that was why I had so many deficiencies. And then literally taking out the trash helped me to my gut to start absorbing better and absorbing nutrients. And yeah, so it's one of those things that you kind of, it's difficult to balance sometimes, but you have to start somewhere. And sometimes very sick people need to take out the trash before they can start actually absorbing what they're eating.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Um, any specific tips for SIBO?
Um, SIBO is, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where you've got kind of, translocation of bacteria in the wrong place. So it's not that it's necessarily pathogenic in and of itself. It's just it's not where it should be. So yeah, I mean, people with SIBO or SIFO definitely benefit from liver flushing, and ultimately you can start doing kill protocols as well, which is to just do a more targeted approach so that you're introducing some kind of herb or turpentine or something that helps to loosen up and kill off some of those biofilms so that the liver flush can be more effective.
Mm. Did you ever play around with oregano oil? Like I interviewed Cass Ingram several
Yes.
times before he passed, and
Yeah.
that stuff's strong.
It's really, really strong, yes. And it can be, super helpful for kind of, short-term infections and illness and stuff. But yeah, it's pretty potent. It's pretty potent. And of course, it can kill off good bacteria. It's not discriminating. So yeah, you can't kind of take those things long term, or you have to rotate them, for example.
Hmm. Someone asked about lowering ALT, AST with the liver and fibrosis. Should those go down or have you seen those go down in people that are consistent with liver flushing?
Uh, I personally don't know. I don't do bloods, so
Mm.
it would be difficult for me to say, but I think that you would see them come down in time. But sometimes you can get a fluctuation in some of these markers or enzymes because it depends where in the process you're having your enzymes tested or your bloods tested. So, if you were getting tested in a period of congestion where you hadn't flushed for a while, you get the movement of congestion then, or stones and sludge from further back in the liver to the into the common bile duct again, and that can temporarily cut off the flow of bile. And then if you looked at a blood panel, those enzyme markers might rise, and that could seem like something to be alarmed about, but it just means that it's taking a picture of what your liver is doing at the time. So I'm kind of glad that I haven't had bloods done during my liver flushing journey, because I'm sure at times it might have looked like some weird stuff was going on. But I've just relied on my body's own biofeedback and known that over time, all the sort of signs of my chronic illnesses have all got better. So I know that that's what I need as feedback to tell me that I'm doing the right thing. So yeah, I'm sorry, I can't really answer that question.
No, I love that approach. I'm the same way with biohackers, just endless blood work. And I mean, it's expensive, and I just
Mm,
rather see hair, urine,
Yeah.
stool, a Lego scan,
Yeah.
no needles, ideally.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's also we do live in a culture that does, sort of value, and there's a sense of urgency. Like, we want things to change now. We want results now. We want to be able to see things. Whereas the liver flushing journey has taught me incredible patience, because sometimes things can flare up. Sometimes things can feel worse. You go through, huge cleansing periods, die off, Herxheimer, old symptoms coming back. So retracing of past symptoms. There's a lot that happens. And if I'd got scared or worried or started chasing a particular symptom rather than seeing it as just an expression of what my liver's working on at the time, I would have given up. And I think it's quite important to say that with this journey, you have to kind of see it through for the the gains come after years, not weeks and months. So it's taken a long time for me to get to where I am today, I think. And so, yeah, it's not a quick fix. Don't start it kind of expecting, kind of a quick turnaround in your condition. Just do it, but play the long game if you want to do it.
Do you think people that are relatively, quote unquote, healthy with, you know, essentially no symptoms or almost no symptoms, chronic health stuff, could they see, results from the liver flushing quickly? Like,
Yeah, I
uh,
would say more quickly, but they will be surprised that they will still pull out something from their past, which will come to the surface and probably cause flare up of some issue for them. So I do, anyone I take on, I kind of wave a big red flag in front of them and say, you really want to do this? And I sort of spell out, and I do caveat it, because it is important to know that everything that went into your liver, you're now asking to come back out in the other direction. And it's in your liver for a reason. And it's in your liver because your body couldn't metabolize it or excrete it at the time. And it's very concentrated what's in there. It gets more and more concentrated over time. And the older it is, the more inflammatory it is, and the more acidic it is. So, yeah, it's definitely not for the faint-hearted. I would say that if you're relatively healthy, there's lots of other things you can try first before jumping into liver flushing.
that's great. This is a good one. How do you minimize detox reactions when liver flushing?
Mm. Um, I would say you can't completely, and that's me being totally honest and wearing my honesty hat, which is what I try and do when I talk about this process, is you can't. Some of it you just have to relive and re-experience, and that can be very challenging. But there are tools. Soluble fiber is a brilliant tool, as we've talked about before. Zeolite is my other kind of favorite binder. High dose zeolite. I use for that specifically, and you can use it more than once a day. Other binders, bentonite, psyllium husk, they can all be very helpful. And also things that thin or help the bile to move and make it more liquid. Turpentine, for example, phosphatidylcholine, certain bitter herbs, cholagogues, all those are really important, and just supporting yourself nutritionally, electrolytes, minerals, yeah, all those good things. But yeah, it's not entirely possible. If you want to do liver flushing, you have to be prepared for the detox reactions.
Yeah, I would imagine sweating in a sauna would help.
Yes, good point. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I love saunas.
Any particular type, or that, so there's like, steam,
Yeah.
carbon panel, you know, wood
You're getting
fired. Just
you're
those.
getting very specific again, Matt. Um, I don't know about the type of paneling, but I'm just going to say, just yeah, heat, like a Swedish or whatever it's called, a Swedish sauna is very good. Sauna blankets can be helpful, but yeah, probably more so that than the one that just has like the red lights in it.
Mhm.
Sorry,
That's
I don't know
awesome.
the, yeah.
No, no, that's great. Um, let's see, maybe just a few more or one more. What are the environmental toxins that most impact the liver?
Oh gosh.
Well, you mentioned glyphosate. Did you say that's one of the
Mhm.
big ones?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, any kind of pesticide, some obviously have kind of a longer sort of, half-life than others. Heavy metals, these aren't kind of specific, I suppose, environmental pollutants, but and anything like that, really, heavy metals. For me, the biggest thing that damages the liver is antibiotics.
Mm,
So that's the one. I mean, you just see so many people turn up in clinic with, having had multiple rounds of antibiotics, unfortunately, and that's always a major one because that's where dysbiosis starts. And then, produces a lot of endotoxin, what we call LPS or lipopolysaccharide, and that ends up having to be mopped up by the liver. So anything that affects the gut and the gut bacteria will get passed through to the liver, and the liver then has to act like a satellite gut to
mm,
mop up those things. So that's the one that really damages people because it really kills off your own your innate environmental mop-up crew, which are your gut bacteria. So anything that
mm,
damages those is going to affect your liver. So yeah.
mm. What are your thoughts on probiotic supplementation? Because when I was researching COVID heavily a few years ago, I was looking at studies that were showing all the nutrients that it depletes just having that infection, like the B vitamins, the fat soluble vitamins, the water
Mm,
soluble vitamins. It just like wipes out so many things. But it also kills the gut bacteria, which I found
mm,
fascinating. And so I did a high dose one from Visbiome. It's like a almost like a prescription packet thing for people with IBS and Crohn's and stuff. And so it's like a mega dose of, and I felt
mm,
euphoric. I just
mm,
drank it once and I felt brain chemicals firing off and I wasn't expecting that and an energy boost. It was hard to sleep that night. So I was definitely deficient. But yeah, I know there's so many different types and, you know, I like more the influencer kind of strain, the spore based kind of
mm,
idea with bacteriophages, which is what I sell. And
mhm.
bacteriophages have cool effects on a bunch of different things. But yeah, just
Would
curious.
that
Your Mhm.
would that be like soil based? Or is that
Mhm.
like SBOs?
Yeah, yes, kind of different but similar.
Okay. Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, they seem to have better adherence, I think, don't they?
yeah, and they're heat resistant, so you could like
Mm.
literally cook with them.
Yes. Yeah, 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 yeah. And they survive, and obviously then they survive transit and they
Mhm.
survive the stomach acid and the different pH. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. So I don't it's not like a first line kind of sort of defense. I think, ideally your gut grows its own bacteria. So
Mhm.
anything you put in there is usually in terms of, probiotic is
Mhm.
usually transient.
Yeah.
If you haven't changed the terrain in there, it's not going to do any good.
Mhm.
It's just going to, as I put in one of my posts, it just will create expensive farts. So, yeah, if you've done the work on your liver and therefore you've helped with your kind of digestive flow to the gut, then the microbiome can start to change. If you want to put probiotics in there, by all means do so, but it's not necessarily indigenous to your
Mhm.
gut. And so it's better really to ultimately, I think, to use prebiotic approaches so that you are giving the substrate for your own bacteria to flourish. But one thing I've been amazed about with liver flushing is because, you might presume that, doing all that kind of very intense work with your colon, eliminating all this stuff, that you might deplete your gut flora. And I've had that question many times, but actually my observation is actually over time, in the long term, you actually improve the makeup and diversity of your gut flora. So that's really interesting. So yeah, and also I just think from the point of view of a healthy organism is from the point of view, if you have like a healthy metabolism and if your thyroid is good and you got kind of good body temperature and you've got good energy expenditure and you're in a high energy availability state, you're going to have good gut flora, right? So it's about how well the host feels metabolically, holistically, as a whole person, as a whole organism. That is going to also really influence how healthy and diverse your gut bacteria is. People who are in a low energy availability state, hypothyroid, tend to have the least diverse bacterial makeup in their microbiome.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of people go right to the probiotics and antiparasitics first, and like basic health, and really they should be doing foundational stuff like you talk about first before adding those in. But I can imagine how both can help in addition to what you talk about. But if it's, the only thing that people are using,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think
oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just
No.
going to say, I think also, I think the research, at least the research I've read, suggests that fermented foods tend to have a better kind of first line approach for probiotics rather than taking probiotics in terms of pills or supplements, because they really improve the diversity just through eating sauerkraut or different fermented vegetables. That would be my kind of first line suggestion for somebody who is looking to introduce different types of bacteria.
Yeah, absolutely. I think even the transient can have benefits, for example, when traveling and,
Yeah,
acute
definitely.
scenarios and
Yeah.
things.
And post antibiotic use, for
Mhm.
example, it definitely has a place, but I don't think it's necessarily long term. The research doesn't necessarily stack up for its ability to actually fundamentally change the ecosystem.
Mhm. Well, Elizabeth, this has been so much fun. I learned a lot. I'm inspired to try it, although I don't know if I'll do the 10 p.m. Program. I'll do the other one.
You're going to try a daytime flush.
I think so. Yeah, between you and Adam, I'm pretty inspired. So yeah, it's
Amazing.
really cool.
I hope you'll let everybody know how it goes.
I will. Yeah, I'll post a not too graphic picture.
We love the graphic pictures, believe me. There's no corner of the liver flushing community that doesn't enjoy the gross pictures.
I'm sure you've seen like the ropeworm forums and groups, and
Hmm.
being from Curazone, and I mean I was in the Robert Casar. He was my guy back in the day, and so I was on his liquids of vitality and the parasite program, and I was getting into the strainer in the toilet and chopsticks and collecting them and
We've all
alcohol.
been there.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
But who knows what was food and what was a worm. So.
Oh, well, quite. Yes. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. I guess wrap up with a bang. Do you believe the ropeworm is real? Because a lot of people say it's just the intestinal tract, like the
Mm.
sloughing off,
Yeah, I tend to be with that
Mhm.
camp. I mean, I think it can be helpful because some of that mucus is really old and does harbor biofilm and toxic organisms, but you have to be careful not to completely sort of strip the mucus layer of the colon. But yeah, I mean, I think getting out that, especially if it looks kind of really old and sort of like knotted and stuff, it's good to get that stuff out, but it's not a parasite, not in the way that they say it is.
Yeah, the zoomed in pictures look really scary. I mean, they look like what a demon would look like with huge,
Wow. I mean, I guess
reptile.
if some of them are, I mean, you can get liver flukes out that kind of, look, you can see that they're liver flukes. So you could definitely get parasites out.
Mm.
But yeah, I'm slightly skeptical of those
Yeah,
like mucusy looking worm things.
30 foot. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is awesome. Where do people find you?
So they can find me on Instagram at Naturally Wells, or they can find me on my website, which is also naturallywells.com.
Awesome. Elizabeth, I had so much fun. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for asking me. I had lots of fun too.
Awesome. Well, stick around as we close out the show. So as I said in the show, I have not done a liver flush yet. I have a few friends that have raved to me about the benefits of them. And if life ever slows down, I'm juggling so much on this new mountain, and it always takes some energy to start a new protocol. When she said that you start at 10 p.m. at night, that definitely turned me off, because if I go to bed past 11 p.m., I'm just a zombie the next day. So I like that you can actually do one earlier in the day, but I have to research that a little more. I think just emphasizing liver health and how to support it and bioflow is so important and definitely underrated. A lot of people go for the parasite cleanses first, or the heavy metal detoxes, most of which are stressful. If it's not the high dose powdered zeolite, then it's generally going to be a stressful detox, getting those heavy metals out. But you can't go wrong with starting with the liver. And I think back to when I did dozens and dozens, probably hundreds of coffee enemas many years ago. And it was such an important reset from the first 20 years of my life. I felt like I was literally reborn after doing that many coffee enemas. And slow and steady isn't always best, like a lot of practitioners say. I don't necessarily agree with that. Sometimes you go pedal to the metal from the get-go for a while. That's what I did with the coffee enemas, and it wouldn't have worked if I just did one a week at the start. I did them pretty much every day for, I think, 6 months straight was my longest streak, and that was the biggest reset. And it's pretty much a one and done from my experience. But everybody's different and has different things going on in their life, so that's something that you have to experiment with. If you want to check out Elizabeth's work, as she mentioned, she's on Instagram, Naturally Wells. Her website is naturallywells.com. If you check out her store, she has the Candida masterclass and then one called Bioflow 101. She shares a lot of great stuff on social media, a lot of free information, so definitely check that out. My website is matt-blackburn.com. It just got overhauled. I had my team flown out a few months ago, and we had a photographer from Washington come out to my mountain and spent half a day taking new photographs of myself, which I'm not a huge fan of. It was definitely a workout, but I slammed some new brews, some ketone shots, some coffee, and got through it. We took some cool pictures in the bunker, and you'll see a lot of those on the website. It just looks a lot cleaner. And if you click on the top part, the 3 bars, you can click podcast or shop. And what's cool about the shop page is now you can actually organize it by category, whether it's devices or dental care or sleep or light therapy. It will bundle them all together. I am getting asked quite a bit if the CLF protocol is going to be back on the website. It definitely will. We're just upgrading the look of it, and that was way overdue. It didn't have a good presentation since I first wrote the CLF protocol, so we are souping it up, making the pictures better, making it easier to follow, not just blocks of text. So that's the protocol that I created: calcification, lipofuscin, and fibrosis. That's like the core philosophy of my health protocol, what I believe the biggest detox that we can do is, and it's the long game. So it's not just a temporary short cleanse, it's for the long haul. And we're continually lowering the accumulation of those 3 things, as well as actually removing the accumulation that's already there. And that coincides with the supplements that I sell. My brand's called MitoLife. I started with researching supplements years and years ago. This was 2010. when I was vegan, vegetarian, raw vegan. I did really just endless, rigorous daily experimentation with supplements. I had a friend that worked at Sprouts, Garrett. I hung out with him in the supplement section for hours and hours, just turning around bottles, listening to customers, seeing what people were buying. So I really was in the trenches for many, many years before I started my own supplement line. With a lot of these people, they start with the question of what's trending, how can I make money? Whereas for me, the question was, what's missing that I want to take out there? Why are no companies using bio bottles that break down in landfills in a couple of years? Why are these companies using plastic bottles that contribute to the decline of testosterone and the betadization of males all around the world through the microplastics effect? Why not upgrade the system that we're using? Set a new standard. That's what I do with MitoLife. I'm setting new standards, upping the ante, challenging companies to do better with excipients and fillers. I switched to bamboo silica for all the supplements as the flow agent, because unless you're bottling all of these by hand, you need machines to do it in the volume that I do it with MitoLife. And those machines get clogged if you don't have a flow agent in there. And so I found bamboo silica was the best one, better than magnesium stearate or regular silica, definitely better than titanium dioxide and a lot of crazy things. There's even biohacking supplements out there that are colored red because they're using iron oxide. There's one called urolithin A that uses iron oxide in it, which is just ridiculous. If you're going to supplement iron, you want to supplement heme iron from 3 Arrows, or you want to supplement iron bisglycinate. Nobody will get any beneficial effects from supplementing iron oxide. That is the most ridiculous ingredient to put in a biohacking supplement. So check it out, mitolife.co. There's 3 tabs there: water, wellness, and living. If I sound hopped up, I just got back into cold thermogenesis, ice baths, definitely getting back in the groove, using my sauna almost every single day, just feeling a lot better. So I'm happy to be finally grounded, somewhat settling in here on my new acreage here in North Idaho. Really just feeling good in my brain here at the tail end of winter, getting my dopamine boost from the cold. There's a lot of information out there on coupled haplotypes versus uncoupled. I'm an uncoupled mitochondrial haplotype, which means that I actually am designed to get my dopamine not from sunlight, from the conversion of tyrosine into levodopa to dopamine, but actually, in fact, from cold thermogenesis, from cold exposure. And that's why I live in the north. I feel better from cold. I feel better in the winter than I do in the summer. So that's something that I encourage you to experiment with. Check me out on Instagram. I'm posting daily on there, stories pretty much every single day. That's Matt Blackburn on Instagram. I don't post on Facebook much. That place just is kind of annoying, kind of older generations, kind of stuck in their ways. So I don't look at that very often. New episode posted every Friday. If you want to look at the old episodes on YouTube, you can just search MitoLife Radio and you'll see over 300 episodes pop up on there. So that is all. I'll see you guys next week. Stay supercharged. Stay rogue.